Twice a day, the Thames pulled back. For a few hours, as the tide receded, the river exposed a wide stretch of mud and shingle along its banks, a temporary landscape that appeared and disappeared with the rhythm of the moon. And onto that exposed mud, twice a day, walked some of the youngest workers in Victorian London. Children. Some as young as 4 or 5 years old, wading barefoot into freezing, filth-laden mud, searching for anything that could be sold for even a fraction of a penny. They were called Mudlarks, and their story is one of the starkest illustrations of childhood in Victorian Britain, a story of extraordinary hardship, surprising resourcefulness, and a window into exactly what fell through the cracks of the world's wealthiest empire. To understand the Mudlarks, you first have to understand the Thames itself in the early to mid-19th century. The river was, simultaneously, the commercial lifeblood of the British Empire, and one of the most polluted bodies of water on the planet. Thousands of ships moved cargo in and out of London's docks every day, and everything that fell, spilled, or was thrown from those ships, along with everything that washed down from the city's streets, its factories, its slaughterhouses, and increasingly its sewers, ended up in the river. When the tide went out, twice a day, all of it was exposed. Coal that had spilled from barges, pieces of metal, copper, iron, brass, fallen from ships during loading and unloading, rope, bones, wood, bottles, and occasionally coins, jewellery and other valuables lost overboard or washed down from the streets above. To a family living in absolute poverty in the riverside districts of London, Wapping, Rotherhithe,
Bermondsey, this exposed mudflat represented something valuable. Free raw materials available to anyone willing to wade in and collect them. Henry Mayhew, writing in the 1850s, estimated that several hundred people made their living, in whole or in part, by mudlarking along the Thames. A significant proportion of them were children. The work was, by any modern standard, almost unimaginably harsh.
Mudlarks worked barefoot, regardless of season. Shoes would have been ruined within days by the mud and the broken glass and metal that littered the riverbed, and most Mudlark families could not afford to ruin shoes. So children waded into the Thames in winter, when the water temperature could be close to freezing, with nothing protecting their feet. The mud itself was dangerous. It contained broken glass, rusted metal, animal bones with sharp edges. Cuts were constant. Infection was common. There was no medical care available to families living at this level of poverty. A cut foot that became infected could become a serious illness, and a serious illness in a family with no income could become a crisis. The mud also contained raw sewage. London's sewer system in the first half of the 19th century discharged directly into the Thames. The river that Mudlarks waded through, twice a day, every day, was functionally an open sewer for one of the largest cities on Earth. And then there was the tide itself. The Thames is tidal, meaning the water level rises and falls dramatically, and the timing of low tide shifts by roughly 50 minutes each day. Mudlarks had to know the tide tables precisely. Working too close to the turn of the tide, or misjudging how quickly the water would return, could mean being caught by the incoming tide in deep mud, a genuinely fatal situation. Mayhew recorded that drownings among mudlarks, particularly children, are not uncommon. What did a day of mudlarking actually yield? Mayhew's accounts describe children working for hours, often 4 to 6 hours per low tide, twice a day when conditions allowed, to collect items that, in total, might be worth 2 or 3 pence. 2 or 3 pence? for perhaps 10 to 12 hours of work in freezing, sewage-laden mud with constant risk of injury or drowning. What were they collecting? Coal was perhaps the most valuable common find. Coal that had fallen from barges during loading could be collected, dried, and sold for fuel, or used to heat the family's own home. Iron and copper fragments were sold to metal dealers. Rope was unravelled and the fibres sold for caulking ships or making paper. Bones went to bone grinders for fertiliser. Even old nails had value, straightened and resold.
The economics were brutal but precise. Every category of waste had a buyer. The Mudlarks were, in effect, the bottom tier of an enormous informal recycling economy that kept Victorian London's industries supplied with raw materials that would otherwise have been genuinely lost. Mayhew interviewed several Mudlark children directly, and his transcriptions, preserved in London Labour and the London Poor, are among the only first-person accounts we have of working-class Victorian childhood in their own words. One boy, who Mayhew estimated to be about 8 years old, described his daily routine: waking before dawn, checking the tide times, going to the river with his sister, working until the tide turned, returning home to eat whatever the family had, and then going out again for the afternoon low tide. He described the cold as the worst part, worse than the cuts, worse than the smell. He said his feet were numb within minutes of entering the water, and stayed numb until he got home. He also described, with what Mayhew noted as genuine pride, finding a piece of copper large enough to be worth 4pence, more than a typical day's entire earnings from a single find. He had used part of the money to buy bread for his family. This detail matters, because the Mudlarks were not simply victims. Within a system that had failed them completely, they were also, in their own small way, economic actors. Children who understood value, who developed genuine expertise in identifying what was worth collecting, who contributed meaningfully to their family's survival, and who, in the case of Mayhew's young informant, took pride in that contribution. This is one of the most uncomfortable aspects of studying Victorian child poverty. The children were not passive. They were skilled. They were knowledgeable. They had, by necessity, developed competencies that most adults today will never need. Reading tides, identifying valuable materials by touch in murky water, navigating genuinely dangerous terrain. And all of that skill and knowledge existed because Victorian Britain offered these children and their families absolutely nothing else.
There was no compulsory education until the Elementary Education Act of 1870, and even after that, attendance was patchy and often unenforced for the poorest families, who depended on their children's labour, however meagre the earnings, for survival. There was no child labour law that meaningfully protected children working informally, outside of factories. Mudlarking was not factory work, so the limited factory legislation of the period did not apply to it at all. The Mudlarks existed in a genuine gap: too poor for school, too young for factory work, or working informally precisely because factory work had age and hour restrictions that informal river scavenging did not. Invisible to the regulatory frameworks that, however inadequately, governed other forms of Victorian child labour. What happened to Mudlark children as they grew older? The honest answer is that we mostly don't know. Mayhew's accounts capture a moment, the 1850s, and the children he interviewed do not reappear in any record. Some presumably moved into other forms of casual labour as they grew. Some almost certainly did not survive childhood at all, given the disease environment they worked in daily. The mudlarking economy itself persisted, in diminished form into the early 20th century, gradually reduced as London's sewer system was rebuilt after 1858, as the river became somewhat less universally polluted, and as the items that had once been worth collecting became less common as
Industrial processes changed. Today, mudlarking has experienced an unexpected revival as a hobby. Licensed mudlarks search the Thames foreshore at low tide for historical artefacts, and the Thames has yielded extraordinary finds: Roman coins, medieval pilgrim badges, Tudor jewellery, clay pipes by the thousand. Museums display these finds. Books are written about them. There are waiting lists for mudlarking permits. It is worth sitting with the contrast. The same stretch of riverbank where Victorian children waded barefoot through sewage searching for fourpence worth of copper to keep their families from starving is now a recreational activity for hobbyists with permits, searching for treasures to display in glass cases. The mud has not changed. What we ask of children has. If the hidden lives of history matter to you, the people the record almost lost, subscribe. Every week we find them. Next week, the Victorian matchgirls of London, the young women whose jaws rotted from the inside from the chemicals in their work, and the strike that changed industrial Britain forever. See you then.